Welcome back to the Dr. Jonette channel. Today we are making a delicious loaf of rye bread. This is in anticipation of St. Patrick's Day. I know many of you will be celebrating St. Patrick's Day with corned beef and cabbage. And you may, if you're lucky, have a little corned beef left over. Rye is the perfect bread to make a delicious Reuben sandwich with those corned beef leftovers. So let's get baking and make some rye bread. Make sure you watch all the way to the end though, because I will be telling you how rye can help you lose weight, improve your mood, and improve your memory. So to get started here, I have got 3 cups of white flour in my mixing bowl. I'll be using a stand mixer today for this recipe. I do not recommend that you try to mix this recipe by hand or knead this recipe by hand. It's going to take a long time to do it, and you will find you don't get nearly as good of a rise of your nice loaf of delicious rye bread. If you're putting all that work in, you want to have a wonderful, tasty, moist, delicious product at the end. So I do recommend that you use a stand mixer, but if you don't have one, rye bread that you knead by hand is still better than no rye bread, or in my opinion, rye bread that you buy in the store. To my 3 cups of white flour, I am adding 1.5 cups of rye flour. I'm adding a medium rye flour. You could use pumpernickel flour, or half of this rye flour could be pumpernickel and half a light rye, either one. But you want 1 1/3 cups of rye flour. And next to that, I'm actually have a 1.5 cups of water here that I'm going to be adding some of my liquid to. I'm going to be adding 1/4 cup of olive oil. I like to use olive oil. It's better for your brain and it's healthier. I am also using some orange blossom honey. Any honey will work. I just happen to have some nice Florida orange blossom honey. I'm adding about 1/4 cup. Oh, by the way, the water is about 110 degrees. You want your water to be a bit warm. And I am going to mix that up here. And let that sit and kind of dissolve up the honey while we add the rest of our ingredients to our flour. One of the things that makes rye bread so delicious is that deli rye flavor. And today I have a couple of things that help me add the deli rye flavor, as well as help the rye bread be softer, less crumbly. One of them is King Arthur flours. If you go to my website, I have links out to King Arthur flour for both the deli rye flavor and also the rye bread improver. This is rye bread improver that I'm adding. I'm adding 1/4 cup of rye bread improver. I'm adding a tablespoon of instant yeast. If you don't have it in bulk, you can add 1 package, about 1.5 packages actually, of your instant yeast. And I'm adding a tablespoon of caraway seeds and a teaspoon of my deli rye flavor. If you don't have the deli rye flavor or the rye bread improver, you could use pickle juice instead of the deli rye flavor and the rye bread improver. I would try to get a hold of some whole grain bread improver if you're using pickle juice, as it does help give a better product. But if you can't get a hold of it, in fact, again, it's at it's on my website. There's a link to it there that you can get it from King Arthur flour. But if you don't, you can use pickle juice. Use half of your liquid as pickle juice, dill pickle juice, not sweet pickle juice, dill pickle juice, and half of your liquid as water. I have 1.5 cups of water, so that would be 3/4 cup of the pickle juice and 3/4 cup of the water. This is my simple is smart tip. If you don't have deli rye flavor and rye bread improver, use pickle juice to flavor your rye bread. Cut your water in half and use half pickle juice, half water. 3/4 cup of pickle juice and 3/4 cup of water. To that, I'm also adding, I like a dill, kind of a herb dill flavor in my rye bread. So I have some fresh dill here. Sometimes I just add dill seeds, a tablespoon of dill seeds, but today I had some fresh dill. So I'm adding 1/4 cup, about 2 tablespoons of chopped up fresh dill, and it will give it some nice delicious herb look to the bread as well as the delicious dill flavor. And lastly, before I add my liquid, I am going to add some sea salt, about 1.5 teaspoons of sea salt to my bread. And my honey should be pretty much mixed in, and I'm going to add that liquid all at once to my bowl. And I may need to scrape up the honey a little bit there. When we were growing up, we always made our own bread, and my mom always used honey for sweetening the bread. A lot of people will use sugar, but I love the taste of honey as the sweetener in my bread. And I'm going to go ahead and put that on my mixer, and I am going to mix that up. I've got our rye bread ready to knead, and I've attached the dough till hook to my mixer, and I am going to knead, once the flour is all moistened, I'll be kneading the dough or the bread for about 7 minutes with my stand mixer. If you're kneading by hand, it will take quite a bit longer than that, and your product won't rise as much, as I mentioned before. If you found this video helpful so far, thank you for signing up for notifications so that you don't miss any of our great recipes, neuronutrition nuggets, health tips, and gardening tips, as well as how to live longer and healthier. As you can see, I mixed this bread for 7 minutes on about medium to medium high speed, and you can see it's a little sticky. It's sticking to the mixer a little bit, but not bad. And it's a nice soft bread, and it's not sticking to my hands really. This is about the perfect amount of moisture in it versus softness. So this is going to be a great loaf of rye bread. I'm going to actually put it right here in this bowl, and I've greased it with a little bit of olive oil, and we're going to let it rise. I'm going to cover it, and we're going to let it rise. While it's rising, let's talk about our Neuronutrition Nugget. For our Neuronutrition Nugget, we're going to talk about rye bread today. Rye bread, there's an interesting study that was done on rye and the use of rye bread. In this study, they took 2 groups of people. One group they gave rye bread, and the rye bread was half rye and half white flour. And the other group, they gave all bread that was all white flour. And they only did the study for a few days. I think it was a little less than a week. At the end of the study, they noticed 3 important things. One was that the group that ate the rye bread had an increase in insulin sensitivity. Why is that important? An increase in insulin sensitivity actually can help you lose weight. It allows your body to utilize the glucose better that is available instead of storing it as excess fat. It lets you utilize it so that you have a more steady blood sugar and you get more sugar or glucose to your brain. as you get more glucose to your brain, what happens is you're able to think better, you're able to remember better, and most importantly in this study, what they saw was that they reported an increase in their verbal or working memory. And they also reported an increase overall in their mood, probably due to the increased availability of energy within their brain. And more energy would make more neurotransmitters. But the other thing that probably also contributed was that rye is a good prebiotic. It's a good prebiotic because it contains what's called a resistant starch. And the gut microbiome needs those resistant starches in order to thrive, and that's their food source. So our gut, remember, makes also 90% of serotonin, which is another one of our mood elevators. And so that probably also contributed to the increase in mood overall of the subjects that ate the rye bread. So rye bread is a good prebiotic. It may elevate your mood. It may help you think better, learn better, remember better, and it also has some anti-inflammatory properties. Rye is one of those grains that is considered an anti-inflammatory grain, and it's one of those grains that is recommended by the Arthritis Society as an anti-inflammatory grain for people who have a lot of inflammation, like people that have arthritis. So lots of great reasons to incorporate rye into your diet. And one of the best ways, my favorite ways, is to use rye in rye bread. We're going to let our rye bread rise for about an hour to an hour and a half until it's about double in size. Then we'll form it into a loaf, let it rise again, and bake it. The best temperature for letting your bread rise is around 76 to 80 degrees. If your room isn't that warm, and most of us don't keep our room that warm, put your bread in the oven, turn on the oven light, and it will be just enough extra heat in the oven to help your bread rise a little better and a little faster. And for today's Simple Smart tip, help your bread rise better and faster by putting it at a temperature of about 76 to 80 degrees. Most of us don't keep our rooms that warm, but if you turn on the oven light, put your bread in the oven, your pan of bread in the oven. Don't turn the oven on. Put your pan of bread in the oven and let it rise in the oven. It will rise quicker and faster because that extra light, that extra heat from the oven light will increase the temperature of the oven to right around that 76 degrees. So our dough has easily doubled in size at this point, and we are ready to make it into a nice, delicious loaf of rye bread. You could actually put this bread in a bread pan if you wanted. I'm going to just do a freeform type loaf, around freeform type loaf today. But I've gone ahead and put it in a loaf pan and used it as a loaf of sandwich bread, or I just like to make kind of a log with it. I gently deflate it and shape it into a log, and I don't take all of the air out of it. I like to leave some of the air in it and set that on I've got a parchment-lined baking sheet. I will actually use the baking sheet to slide it into the oven. This parchment will go straight on an oven steel, so I'll be baking it right on top of an oven steel rather than on the baking sheet. I'm going to go ahead now and cover it again and let it rise probably another half hour to an hour before it goes in the oven. After about 30 minutes, I will turn my oven on and preheat it to 350 degrees, and I will bake this at 350 degrees for probably about probably about 30, maybe 35, 40 minutes, hard to say. What I like to do is monitor the internal temperature of the loaf. So after about 20 minutes, I'll check the internal temperature of the loaf. Once it hits 190 degrees on the internal temperature, I take it out of the oven and it's baked. Our loaf of rye bread has easily doubled in size and it's ready to go into the oven. The oven is preheated, and I just like to make a few slashes across the top of the loaf, usually about 3 slashes. And then before I put it in the oven, and then I'll go ahead and pop it in the oven that is preheated here. My loaf of rye bread just came out of the oven about 15 minutes ago. It's still warm enough I could almost cuddle with it, but that would be kind of weird, wouldn't it? Anyway, it smells delicious, and it is making my house smell like a wonderful fresh bread bakery. I love the smell of the fresh bread, the caraway, the dill, and all the deliciousness that come together in this loaf of bread. For this full recipe, go to my website at growwithdrjeanette.com, and you'll be able to find this recipe and lots of other bread recipes as well. I have whole grain bread, artisan bread, sweet bread, rolls, challah bread, and even sourdough bread, where I use a natural rise method and teach you how to if you're interested in making sourdough bread as well. Thank you for clicking the like button, subscribing, and signing up for notifications so you don't miss any of our delicious recipes, neuronutrition tips, as well as healthy lifestyle tips, gardening tips, techniques, and so much more on the website. We'll see you next time on the Dr. Jeanette channel, and thank you again for watching. You have a wonderful day.